In almost every true crime story ever told, the killer's primary goal after committing the act is simple: run, wipe away their fingerprints, and vanish into the night. But in some of the most disturbing cases in history, the perpetrator does something entirely unnatural. They stay. They choose to linger in the dark, sleeping in their victim's bed, preparing meals in the kitchen, and living alongside the crime scene while the outside world remains completely unaware. Welcome back to Patterns of Crime. Today, we examine 3 historically verified cases where intruders refuse to leave, and the chilling psychological patterns behind why they stayed. On the evening of June 9, 1912, in the quiet farming community of Villisca, Iowa, Josiah and Sarah Moore returned home with their 4 children and 2 young house guests, 12-year-old Lena and 8-year-old Ina Stillinger. Sometime between midnight and 5 in the morning, an unknown intruder entered the unlocked home carrying a heavy wooden-handled axe belonging to Josiah. The assailant moved silently from room to room, striking all 8 sleeping victims in the head before covering their faces with bedsheets. But what baffled investigators when the bodies were discovered the following morning wasn't just the sheer brutality of the attack, it was what the killer did after the violence stopped. Instead of immediately escaping into the night, the perpetrator remained inside the quiet farmhouse for hours. He walked into the kitchen, filled a wash basin with water, and thoroughly cleaned his hands and the murder weapon. He then sat down at the kitchen dining table, leaving behind a plate of uneaten food and a piece of raw bacon on the floor. Most chillingly, the killer methodically walked through every room in the house, taking cloths and bed sheets to cover every single mirror and glass window before slipping away into the morning fog. While the Villisca crimes occurred over a century ago, this dark behavioral pattern persisted into modern criminal history. In late August of 1990, the quiet college town of Gainesville, Florida, was thrown into terror when a spree killer targeted off-campus student housing. The perpetrator was 36-year-old drifter Danny Rolling, whose actions inside the victims' residences shocked even veteran investigators. After breaking into the home of college freshmen Sonia Larson and Christina Powell, Rolling committed his crimes and then deliberately chose not to escape immediately. Instead, he remained in the apartment for hours, taking a shower in the victim's bathroom to wash away trace evidence. He spent time meticulously wiping down surfaces, cleaning the environment, and posing the crime scenes before slipping back out into the night. Across multiple apartment units in Gainesville, Rolling repeated this precise ritual of lingering long after the acts were completed. In his most notorious crime scene, he decapitated student Krista Hoyt and placed her on a shelf facing the doorway, transforming the domestic space into a twisted showcase. Forensic psychologists later noted that for Rolling, staying in the homes was a way to exert complete psychological dominion over his victims' personal spaces. His insistence on washing himself, altering room layouts, and remaining on-site revealed an offender who derived gratification from occupying the chaos he left behind. Moving to mid-1980s California, another notorious offender took this disturbing psychological behavior to an even more casual extreme. During his horrific reign of terror across Los Angeles and San Francisco, Richard Ramirez, known as the Night Stalker, routinely invaded occupied suburban homes in the dead of night. After carrying out his brutal attacks, Ramirez demonstrated a complete, chilling lack of urgency to flee the scene. Instead of running into the dark, he would calmly walk into the victims' kitchens, open their refrigerators, and rifle through their belongings. On multiple occasions, he raided kitchen cupboards for snacks, poured himself cold drinks, and sat down at the kitchen table to eat. He even turned on the television set, watching late-night broadcasts in the dark living room while surrounded by the silence of the house. Ramirez lingered inside these residences for hours at a time, lounging in the quiet domestic space as if he were an invited resident. Criminologists noted that for Ramirez, staying in the home was the ultimate expression of control, dominance, and utter disrespect toward his victims. By consuming their food, using their appliances, and relaxing in their living rooms, he was claiming total, horrifying ownership over their private sanctuary. Eventually, as dawn approached, Ramirez would casually gather his stolen items and slip back out into the morning streets unnoticed. His brazen refusal to flee highlights the twisted psychological high these offenders experience by lingering inside the very spaces they have shattered. When examining these three vastly different cases, spanning from 1912 Iowa to 1990 Florida, a terrifying common thread emerges. Criminologists often refer to this behavior as post-offense lingering, a state driven by extreme narcissism, shock, or a demand for spatial control. For these intruders, escaping immediately meant surrendering the absolute power they felt while occupying the victim's home. By lingering behind, they claimed temporary ownership over the private sanctuary, domesticating the chaos in a sinister display of dominance. Whether draped under the heavy silence of covered mirrors in Villisca or the cold blue glow of a television set in Los Angeles, their refusal to flee remains one of true crime's most unsettling psychological anomalies. If this deep dive into criminal behavior resonated with you, hit the subscribe button to join us on our journey through mystery and true crime. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on these cases, and click the video on screen right now for our next deep dive into unexplained patterns.